The Cloud Foundry Foundation is our sponsor here for our podcast from the Cloud Foundry Summit in Santa Clara, California. Our discussion, the path emerging as organizations move beyond the confusion of disruption and take the journey to transformation. We'll explore the new concepts of multi-cloud and how it relates to open source app development and management at scale. Cloud Foundry gives companies the speed, simplicity, and control they need to develop and deploy applications faster and easier. Learn more about Cloud Foundry at cloudfoundry.org.
Lee Calcote here with the New Stack. We're at the Cloud Foundry Summit. I'm joined by a handful of very interesting individuals, both from Dynatrace and from Pivotal. Casey and Cornelia, Alois and Michael. Alois, I've been practicing your name from yesterday, so I feel like I've conquered that. Cornelia, it's I think I'm okay. I'm spot on, but I thought we'd just go around the table real quick and let the listeners get to know who you are and which organization you're with. So.
Yeah, I'm Casey West. I'm Principal Technologist for Cloud Foundry at Pivotal, so I spend a lot of time with our customers and with the broader community trying to talk about platforms and DevOps and transformation and the entire ecosystem.
Great. And I am one of Casey's colleagues. My name is Cornelia Davis. I work at Pivotal. I'm a Senior Director of Technology there. Have been working with our very important and engaging customers for the last 3 years on Cloud Foundry, and am now starting to focus a great deal more on Cloud Foundry plus data. So there's going to be a lot coming on the data side as well.
My name is Alois Mayr. I'm with the Dynatrace Innovation Lab, and I'm technology lead there for cloud and container technologies. And right now I'm working closely with our customers and R&D on bringing monitoring to Cloud Foundry environments.
So I'm Mike Villiger. I'm one of Alois's colleagues at Dynatrace. So I used to be part of the product specialist group that was a technical overlay for the field sales engineering team. And now I'm a part of strategic business development, so I'm focused pretty heavily on cloud and DevOps related technologies.
No, very good. Like I said, just a very interesting mix of folks here. This is fantastic. We've been having a few podcasts today, and been talking a little bit about multi-cloud, and that being kind of I think part of the theme of the summit. And so I wanted to throw it out there to you guys about what that means, both to either your products, your offerings, the services you offer, but also just customers that you've engaged with, and whether or not that's a real thing. Are customers using multi-cloud, and is that part of the story with Cloud Foundry?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Customers are using Cloud Foundry, and in even greater numbers planning on using the multi-cloud part of Cloud Foundry. So we have, the canonical example for multi-cloud is in the e-commerce space, where we want to burst out. In the United States, we have the very famous Black Friday and Cyber Monday, where there is a great deal more load than you need the other 363 days out of the year. And being able to burst out into a public cloud, whereas maybe most of the time you're running in your private data center, is an absolutely essential use case. It turns out that e-commerce isn't the only industry. Many industries have their big workloads. We have industries that have every Monday they're closing out books from the weekend type of a thing. So there's bursty workloads in every industry. But then the other part of multi-cloud is being able to have ultimate flexibility. The infrastructure really doesn't matter anymore when you're working with Cloud Foundry. The focus is on the application and the value that the application brings to your consumer base. And so multi-cloud allows you to say, I can truly just ignore the infrastructure and focus on the application. And if there's a better infrastructure 5 years from now, either more cost competitive or more performant or a better feature set or a better customer service, I can make that change.
Yeah, businesses are able to make strategic decisions around not just cost, but the security from the perspective of having flexibility and choice. Because Cloud Foundry is an excellent interface where you don't have to care about the underlying infrastructure, it's managed and automated for you. You can make better choices about where you place your workloads. And if you have several options available, then you can make those choices based on cost or location, or ultimately the security concerns that you may have around your data or your applications.
Totally agree. So For us, we have a lot of customers using multiple clouds. So in today's keynote, there was like the guy talking mentioned that he don't really like the differentiation between private cloud and public cloud because the cloud is everywhere. It's just another computer, right? And so what we see is like having customers around Cloud Foundry that build their stack on top of Cloud Foundry, but they also have like another Cloud Foundry cluster at another availability zone somewhere else. And they also run an OpenStack cluster for something else. So it always depends on the use case, on the applications you want to build and you want to provide for your customers. And so that's basically nothing really new. But here at the Cloud Foundry Summit, I like the topic. I like the overall topic of the summit is like multi-cloud because that's what happens right now in practice.
Yep. Yeah, I like the whole idea of multi-cloud kind of almost as an alternative terminology for hybrid cloud, right? Because once again, why really differentiate between which one it is, especially when you see the trends in the IaaS providers where, let's look at Microsoft, there's going to be all that convergence from an IaaS perspective between, Azure versus what's on-prem, right? It's going to be literally the exact same thing. Right, so you're going to have these PaaS platforms that are running on top of 6 different IaaS platforms. I personally have PCF environments, running locally, running in telco clouds, running in EC2, running in Azure. I mean, it's all over the place. And when you have one common experience between all of them, one common feature set, one common API for deployments, the value there is astronomical.
Cloud Foundry users are in a particularly privileged position where the automation is already completed for you. Organizations that don't have something like Cloud Foundry in place have to worry about automating all of this infrastructure and attempting to place a consistent interface on top of various providers with various
and they've all got their
interfaces.
own API, and even when they try to implement each other's APIs, they don't always do it right, and all sorts of shenanigans ensues. So.
Michael, I think you made an interesting point about kind of the connotation that some of these terms take on, like hybrid versus multi. In your mind, have you, outside of you expressing that just now, have either customers or just folks that you engage with in general, come to that same type of a conclusion about?
So I would say that the distinction actually literally just popped into my head when I said it. So so there's not a whole lot of thought behind that. So I'll just be brutally honest there. But from a customer perspective, I work a lot with our customers in the field, right? And having a multi/hybrid cloud environment is something that everybody is doing simply to protect themselves, so that they don't have lock-in. So I mean, it's completely sensical to have that whole IaaS layer abstracted out.
So abstraction is part of that, kind of this promise and sort of how you get to multi-cloud. But I think along with that is this promise of sort of avoiding vendor lock-in. I think Casey, you were talking about that. The portability as well of workloads, and even policy and governance and sort of cloud brokering or some other concepts that kind of come to play as people go to figure out where they want to put their apps and their workloads. How much of just understanding that Pivotal has been for a long time helping people get to both Cloud Foundry and just consulting engagements at large, different patterns that you guys have seen with respect to the types of organizations or the types of applications that leverage a multi-cloud approach?
That's a good question. My experience is that many of our customers, almost regardless of their industry, end up having very consistent patterns amongst themselves. So you end up talking to a company in financial services, and then you go and you talk to a government organization. And while the technology or the terminology for regulations or specific security constraints tend to vary by industry, a lot of the times the patterns end up being relatively consistent across these industries. And it's interesting to be able to go in there and say, well, you're not alone. A lot of folks have problems that present themselves in a very similar way.
Literally every customer that I speak to at one point in the conversation says, well, you need to understand there's something unique about our company. And then they go on and they say, we have a culture or we have this kind of process in place. And I always smile and nod my head and say, every single one of the customers I talk to have that exact same use case, have that exact same pain point.
Absolutely. And some applications lend themselves to running on the cloud and in the way that Cloud Foundry works best, and some don't. So you'll walk into a conversation, say, with a mutual fund trading company. So I spent some time with a company a few months back, and at some point somebody stopped me dead in my tracks and said, have you ever run a trading system before? And the answer, personally, is no, I have not. And I would not do that on day one on Cloud Foundry either. But while that is at the core of your business and it's highly optimized, you probably have a great deal of software around that core business that can leverage Cloud Foundry, be run well in a cloud-native way. And, of course, they had no choice but to agree, because that's another consistent pattern.
Yeah, and those kind of represent two extremes, which is to say, a trading platform, maybe you don't put that on Cloud Foundry right away, but all the new stuff that you're building around it, you do. But the reality is that there's a lot of workloads that can move over into a Cloud Foundry environment with some change, perhaps. And so one of the misconceptions sometimes is that Cloud Foundry is just for net new greenfield applications, and it absolutely is not. And we have many, many customers who are taking some of their existing workloads, again, maybe not the trading application to start, but they're taking existing workloads and they're bringing it over onto the platform, because the platform isn't just for developers. It's not just to help the developer of the new application. There's a tremendous set of operational benefits that come out of it, in addition to multi-cloud. There's the ability to do monitoring across an application, across a heterogeneous infrastructure, or a very, very distributed infrastructure. And so the operational benefits are just as great. And so there is value in taking existing applications that are running on maybe more traditional server-based infrastructures and adding that abstraction layer in between, which affords you all of those other capabilities, like monitoring.
Mm-hmm. That's right, and you get consistent operational characteristics when you're running your applications on Cloud Foundry, whereas in bespoke infrastructure and bespoke configuration management of your production environment, you tend to see inconsistencies and a difficulty to understand how things work. I suspect that Dynatrace sees this a lot with the customers that you work with too.
Yep. So a lot of the patterns that I see in terms of migration are I personally am not seeing a lot of like wholesale lift and shift of conventional workloads, but what I'm seeing literally more often than anything else is the carving up of existing monoliths and then starting to transition those monoliths into 12-factor applications. And they're doing that piece by piece.
Yep.
Right? So they're not taking the whole thing and doing it all at once. They're taking a certain subcomponent. An example would be something like a reCAPTCHA, right, on a banking application. You're not going to take your bank's entire mobile web platform or something like that and migrate that to Cloud Foundry in a day, right? But you can take out certain pieces and start to move those over. And then it's important to understand the ramifications of that change when that's happening, so that you have, that end-to-end view of that transformational aspect of what's happening, to ensure that this leap of faith that you've taken to pursue a more modern development and deployment methodology, to ensure that that's not negatively impacting your users.
You guys at Dynatrace are probably in a fairly unique position to be able to really have some insights on just, on how people are, where applications are running in their enterprise infrastructure versus in other data centers, public clouds and things. Just you guys from an APM, an application performance management perspective, have got just traceability across all of it. So any interesting patterns that you guys have seen in terms of kind of sort of that multi-cloud story that we were talking about?
So if you, I know Alois is about to open his mouth, but I want to lay one thing on the table, because I was actually talking about this at lunch today. So you talk about the unique value of something like an industry conference like this, is the unique conversations that you have when you're sitting around, eating a burrito bowl at lunch. So I was talking to a couple of folks from Altoros and IBM, and one of the things that I laid on the table that I talked about is, here's a pattern that I've seen. Is I've got you got a customer with a cloud, an application running in the public cloud. It's a mobile app, hits the app stack in the public cloud, then transitions, the same transaction, mind you, transitions into the private data center, and then eventually hits the mainframe. all in the same transaction.
We see that a lot
Right?
too. Yeah.
So literally you're talking about an application on your iPhone, the most modern of modern technology, hitting a mainframe under the covers, which, I don't want to say not the most modern of modern technologies, but maybe it kind of is, So it's really, so when you start talking about, multi-hybrid environments, it really runs the gamut, especially when you get into these long-standing enterprises that are pursuing a transition in a phased approach, and they're not just diving in, right?
It's impressive. One of the things that I just noticed is that we've got 3 speakers sitting around the table here, and I guess I'm just dying to know, some of the topics that you guys are talking about.
Yeah, I gave a talk earlier this afternoon on the build pack model of building and managing containers for Cloud Foundry. It really allows you to do heterogeneous architectures on Cloud Foundry in a really painless way. We talked earlier about having consistent operational characteristics for your applications, and that's what we really want, regardless of the environment, framework, language you choose. It's also important not to have lock-in into any specific middleware stack or any specific technology decision that you've made for one portion of your application architecture when you may have many and you may be able to use the right tool for the job. Cloud Foundry allows you to manage that. So it's, again, to Cornelia's point, not just about the developer experience, but very much about the operator experience. It used to be that you bake a golden image for a specific application stack, and then you live with that for the rest of your life, because to bake new ones and figure out the operational characteristics of Ruby or .NET or something else is a whole new world. But that world is almost entirely automated for you now in Cloud Foundry, where you don't have to have middleware lock-in. You can have portable applications. You can have consistently built containers run on an elastic runtime, and that's what Cloud Foundry gives you. So that was my talk.
Yeah.
Well, my talk was a little bit different, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about that a little bit. So I spoke this afternoon. One of the things that the Cloud Foundry Foundation is very passionate about is making sure that it's a diverse and inclusive and open community. And so I spoke at the diversity lunch. We have had diversity events at the Cloud Foundry Summit this was the 4th one. And so I did a talk on kind of a personal story. You might have noticed, if you're listening, that I am a woman. And women are very underrepresented in technology, and especially I am a technologist. I still cut code. And so we are an underrepresented group. And so I brought a personal story. And in that personal story, really just kind of challenged us all to look at our own internal implicit biases, and study those and really be part of making a change. And the Cloud Foundry Foundation has made that commitment from an organizational perspective, and then we as individuals, I'm asking and challenging each of us as individuals to make that personal commitment as well.
Fantastic. The gauntlet has been put up. The challenge is out there. Okay.
Yeah,
Very
indeed.
Good. Very good.
So my talk was on performance metrics driven CI/CD in a nutshell. Right, the nutshell part is because it was a lightning talk, so I only had 5 wild and crazy minutes up on stage to deliver what it was that I was talking about. But one of the things at Dynatrace that we like to talk about a lot is we've all got this great idea of pipelines, right? So we have our continuous integration pipeline. A developer cuts code and actually commits it into their source control, and then a build happens, and there's unit tests, and if that release passes, then it moves on down the pipeline and perhaps gets automatically deployed into a later stage in the pipeline. So one of our ideas and kind of our thought is that if you're not collecting some additional metrics in that unit test phase, you're actually wasting some of the effort that you've done to commit those unit tests. And you're possibly wasting further engineering time if you move bad code throughout the pipeline that, while it might be functionally sound, it might have architectural or performance regressions. So the whole idea then is to use an APM platform to do things like count the number of SQL calls that are occurring to fulfill that particular unit test. One of the things that we found in talking to our customers is that even as we move to microservices, some of the same problem patterns still occur, right? So the N+1 problem that has plagued us for a very long time. Now that's happening with applications that are making microservice calls, right? So the same problem patterns continue to rear their ugly head, and it behooves us to try and kind of capture that information earlier on in the life cycle so that we don't have to waste our time, maybe deploying that to the staging environment and running a 2-hour-long performance test when you know it's not going to work.
I can only imagine that problem just gets worse with the number of services that come out in a microservice.
Exactly. So it's something that's near and dear to my heart personally, because I've been in the performance engineering space for a very long time, and I was at an organization that was pursuing an agile transformation, right? And with that agile transformation, I went from having one release that I had to execute performance tests on, every couple of weeks or so, to now I have 17 different agile teams giving me a build. And there's no way that you can get through it all, number one. So I was a huge bottleneck. And then number two, I've literally probably wasted 6 to 8 weeks of my life, cumulatively, not all at once, but over all this time, I've probably wasted 6 to 8 months of my life on builds that should have never left a developer's workstation.
What's interesting to me about that is that you said something about being the bottleneck. So as they've gone through that agile transformation, or kind of looking forward into the way that people will work increasingly moving forward, how did you eliminate that bottleneck?
So the whole idea then is actually to scale out the effort, right? To make more metrics and more tooling available to the other team members, right? So instead of me being the single source of all of that information and all of that tooling, some of which was expensive, the idea was to make sure that you were using your tool budget in a meaningful way. So this was actually, once again, this is from before my time at Dynatrace, when I was a customer, to use an APM platform to provide those metrics, and then that having those metrics eliminates a lot of the test scenarios that you might have had to execute in the past.
But I wonder,
right?
Also, is it an element of enabling the developer rather than somebody being the person who you've got to pass this through once the developer is completed with their work?
That is exactly
correct.
correct.
It's about self-service enabling the developer so that they can get the APM capabilities that they need during the development cycle.
Yep, that is hitting the proverbial nail on the head, because having access to that tooling kind of enables the true agile idea of in an agile team, this person isn't a tester. This person isn't a performance engineer. Much to their chagrin, this person isn't an architect, right? Everybody's wearing the same hat. So the whole idea is to scale those efforts out and provide the tooling to everybody so that they can self-service.
Whether it's agile transformation or trying to decompose monoliths into microservices, visibility and access to data and information is absolutely critical. Yep. If you don't have it, you're really flying blind. One of the ideas of decomposing an application along its natural seams and APIs and contracts from a large monolithic system to a microservices is the idea that you start to get some of that visibility. But if you don't put the work in and have the tools in place to achieve it, you're still just as blind. And now rather than being blind to one large system, you're blind to maybe 500 very tiny systems. And that's easily as bad. So things like distributed tracing are a must-have. You need to have an idea of where your requests go. Being able to model the network interactions between your microservices and have visibility there is critical too.
It's a very interesting thought. I'm just, I know, Alois, we talked a little bit about the notion of tracing before, and kind of watching those transactions, particularly in a microservices framework, kind of go from end to end. I think you were talking about that happening, starting on a mobile phone all the way through. I was at OSCON last week and sat through a session on Open Zipkin along with Spigo. There was actually another project there. It wasn't being talked about, but called Pinpoint. And Casey, I don't, just as you guys have taken customers along some of those transformations, are there kind of go-to tooling that you've found that really works well and sort of helping, either helping find some of those seams and break up those contracts, or?
Absolutely. So on top of Cloud Foundry, I was recently asked, I gave a tutorial at OSCON on delivering microservices with Cloud Foundry and Spring. So we spend a lot of time at Pivotal with companies who are building on the Java stack. And so because we make Spring, we spend a lot of time with that as well. And I was asked the question, on top of the core capabilities of the platform, what else would you say should be there in order to really enable developers. And specifically within the context of microservices, I said you need distributed tracing, you need circuit breaker pattern, and you need a good service discovery tool. So within the Netflix open source stack, which is part of Spring Cloud Services, which you can one-click install on Pivotal, you've got all of those capabilities available to you as tools in your toolbox in order to build out a solid microservices strategy. But I think if you don't have these things, to your point, Michael, before, if you don't have visibility, then you're flying blind and you cannot make good strategic decisions. And one of the things I like now is that as of this week, we can one-click install Dynatrace integrations with your application as well.
Can you explain that, Michael? How does that work, or how is Dynatrace?
So that's a great question. So both the Dynatrace Atmon as well as the Dynatrace Ruxit products are available in the build packs, right? So we, along with our customers, are going to utilize those services kind of the same way you're utilizing Cloud Foundry in the first place, right? So we've created a Pivotal Cloud Foundry tile. That Pivotal Cloud Foundry tile deploys a service broker to make the environment aware of Dynatrace related configuration information. Where endpoints are, credentials, all that kind of stuff, the same way that a lot of other service brokers operate. And then what happens is if you have an application, you can consume a service and bind that service to the application. And when you do that, the platform handles the installation and configuration of those APM agents. Something that you used to have to do by hand is now handled by the platform. So it's almost magical how well everything kind of comes together at that point, because within like 3 commands, you can basically deploy an application, deploy your APM agent, and then have that visibility in your APM platform and actually, looking at that information in either the Dynatrace Atmon or the Ruxit product.
And so that feels to me like it's a key enabler to what we were talking about a moment ago, which is developer self-service,
Well,
self-enablement, so that they can get what they need.
Self-service, right?
Yep,
Because that same self-service is also applicable to everybody that's doing a CF push and prod as well. Right?
Developers and operators. Yep, great point.
When people get access to this, it's like getting in a time machine and going 4 years into the future on your automation projects.
Sounds magical, just like Michael was saying. Well, that's fantastic. I really appreciate you guys joining us today. It's been a good conversation. We're about halfway through, I think, the Cloud Foundry Summit. So hopefully you guys have a good rest of the show.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.
The Cloud Foundry Foundation is our sponsor here for our podcast from the Cloud Foundry Summit in Santa Clara, California. Our discussion, the path emerging as organizations move beyond the confusion of disruption and take the journey to transformation. We'll explore the new concepts of multi-cloud and how it relates to open source app development and management at scale. Cloud Foundry gives companies the speed, simplicity, and control they need to develop and deploy applications faster and easier. Learn more about Cloud Foundry at cloudfoundry.org.